Hello, everyone. Today we welcome you in the first English episode of Across the Pond, where we, Povilas and Vytautas, will discuss various topics of American, European, and sometimes global political life. I am a political scientist living in Vilnius, Lithuania, and Povilas is a lifelong practicing lawyer from Chicago, USA. Hello, Povilas. A pleasure to have you here across the pond.
Greetings, Vytautas.
Today, for the first English episode, we would like to discuss one of the topics that, according to the opinion polls, is one of the most important to the Americans themselves, and that's domestic crime. Povilas, could you sketch a kind of a map of this issue here? Why is crime suddenly a hot topic, and is it sudden, or maybe it's a long time coming problem?
Well, first of all, you're right. There is a crime crisis in the United States, especially in the large cities, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Detroit, Cleveland, all across the United States. Crime has risen in the last couple of years by at least 40%, the serious crimes, including murder, robberies, and etc. So Americans are very concerned. Europeans usually hear about certain crimes many times or often. The crimes are federal, but the great majority of crimes in criminal law in the United States is based on state law. Each state has its own laws. People elect the legislature, they pass criminal laws. People elect the state's attorneys who enforce the law, and they elect the judges who hear the cases. So the whole system is based on elected officials, as opposed to federal government, where the attorney general, the chief prosecutor, is appointed by the president of the United States and approved by the Senate. Same thing is true with the local judges, federal judges, the appellate judges, and the Supreme Court. So the difference is states are elected, federal governments are appointed. States are experiencing terrible crimes, and it's partially due, not partially, but very much due to American oligarchs, or we call them billionaires, who, for whatever reasons, decided to fund state elections and to elect the prosecutors and judges who do not enforce criminal law. The result is obvious: the increase in serious crimes all over the cities or across the United States.
If I get it right, you're saying that the reason for the rise of crime levels is mainly political.
Yes. First of all, the same billionaires led by Soros spent tens of billions of dollars promoting political action committees to defund police. So the police departments would not have sufficient funds. They also did everything possible to prosecute and make police work much more difficult. As the result, almost every city has a problem hiring enough policemen. In some cities, there's a 50% vacancy. There is not enough police because policemen are depressed. Policemen are looked more like criminals than the criminals as a result of this procedure. And then the states have passed laws. For instance, let me give you an example, Illinois. Starting January 1st, if a policeman tries to arrest a criminal and the criminal fights the policeman, including injuring the policeman, Illinois passed no bond laws. The criminal is taken to court and the same day released on his own promise to come back to the criminal trial. Same thing is true of attempted murder, second degree. Same thing is true of armed robbery and kidnapping. serious crimes. The criminals commit the crimes, go to court, and same day they're back on the street. And what happens? First of all, they intimidate the witnesses that would testify against them. And secondly, they commit more crimes. There are some exaggerated examples, for instance, in New York, where a criminal has been arrested over 100 times, released to the streets, commits a new crime, and is arrested again. That's an example of one type of law. So in Illinois, starting January 1st, for instance, if somebody trespasses on your property, comes over and refuses to leave, or starts taking your property, stealing it or wrecking it, whatever, a policeman is not allowed to come in and arrest the trespasser. They're not allowed to arrest trespassers in business facilities. Also, if a thief in Illinois goes to a store and steals up to $350 worth of goods, it's only a misdemeanor. That means slap on the hands. Nothing happens to him in courts. And that's one store per day. So he can go to one store, second store, third store. And Illinois is a cheap state. It's only $350. California passed a law, $950. As a result, thieves come in stores, steal everything, the most expensive products, and the same day the products are on sale on Amazon. The last time they estimated the profit of these thefts in California was $20 billion a month. And that's what's happening in American streets.
Well, yeah, that's hard to fathom. As you talk, I'm thinking this phenomena, let's say, this rise of crime and those laws that are like helping it, it's on state by state basis. Some states have this thing and some don't.
Correct.
So it's like, is there correlation? It's democratic states, it's Republican states having this problem, or it's maybe both? Yeah.
There's a huge difference between states. States that are run by Democrats Party, for instance, Illinois, where they run 100% of government is run by Democratic Party. And the cities that are run by Democratic Party, Chicago, New York, all the cities I mentioned, the top 20 cities in the United States are, I believe 19 are run by Democrats. All those cities have criminal laws, criminal problems, massive increase in serious criminal crimes, especially, for instance, carjackings, murders, rapes, drug dealers, huge problems. So what's happening? People are running away from the cities and the Democrat-run states. People are leaving massively, states like California, Illinois, and New York, and they're going to Republican-run states like Indiana, Florida, Texas. Huge difference, because the laws are enforced differently in those states. People feel safer. And don't forget, the primary purpose of any government is to protect its citizens. So when criminal law is not observed and the criminals are running the cities, people are not protected, and the people that were elected to protect them are really breaking their pledges and their oaths. They're not doing their work as they promised. As a result, people are leaving the cities. It's a very serious problem in the United States.
You have the best view of this situation, and we in Lithuania, we just read books and the media, you know. Last year, a liberal author, Michael Schellenberger, if I remember right, published a book called San Francisco, How Progressives Ruin Cities. It was based on the case of San Francisco and the elected officials on the city level, and it looked over many issues about the drug policies, just public safety, all that. But one of the issues there was also this, the kind of allowing the crime, which sounds very strange, at least for me, and I guess for many people in Europe and Lithuania, definitely. All the things that you talk about, allowing, let's say, robbery up to some amount of money worth, sounds very strange. But from that book, I got the opinion that all those reforms by progressive politicians, it received kind of backlash. Now, people in California are electing those officials out of office. Is it, or is it just imagination of mine?
It's partially true, but it's difficult. Once, for instance, a state attorney is elected, he serves usually for 4 years, and it's very difficult to get rid of him. The electors can recall a person like that, or even a judge, but it's a long and expensive and very difficult process. In some states, the governor can suspend or even fire state's attorneys who are not following the law, but that's rarely done. What's happening on a local basis, for instance, in San Francisco that you mentioned, Los Angeles, people are revolting against the government, are demanding recalls. In San Francisco, they recalled the state's attorney who was not prosecuting the laws. That's a good example. What happened in San Francisco was one of the most beautiful cities in the United States. First, they allowed street people to live wherever they want. They don't have toilets, so they can do their bodily functions anywhere, in the streets, during the day, in front of schools, in front of churches, in front of businesses, and they are not arrested. They're allowed to do whatever drugs they want. They're shooting drugs. They have drug needles all over the streets. You cannot walk barefooted in San Francisco because you may step on a poisonous pin. Anyway, all of that is happening as a result of these liberal, ultra-liberal funded prosecutors and even the legislators who passed these laws. As a result, California, which is one of the beautiful states in the United States, has over 200,000 people living on the streets, more than any country. They have more poverty than any state in the country. And they have most people escaping California, more than any other state in the United States. But people are trying it's very difficult. But as long as they keep electing the governor and the legislatures, and in turn the judges and the prosecutors, they will continue having that kind of system. Chicago, for instance, in Illinois, the city has been run by the same party almost 100 years, 100%. Every judge that's elected in Cook County is a Democrat. There is not even an opponent running against the judges. There's no Republican running. They're all Democrats. They're not chosen because they're good judges or good lawyers. They're chosen because they're loyal to the party. All the prosecutors in Illinois, in Chicago, have been Democrats. As a result, the crime is exploding. On the federal level, it's a little different. Since Obama came to power as president for 8 years, he brought in Chicago politicians to run Washington. And now Washington, by President Biden's administration, is beginning to run like Chicago. And we have a dual system of justice. It is very clear that the federal government is prosecuting Republicans, and especially President Trump's backers, and ignoring crimes committed by Democrats and Biden supporters, including his son. And that is very obvious, and it's very damaging to the country.
This will sound like a blasphemy maybe for a citizen of United States, but I dare ask if this is something stemming out of the structure of judicial and, to be more precise, criminal system. Maybe the problem is that the officials, you know, prosecutors and others, have too much power, too much liberty to do as they like. I imagine like the governor of any state or the mayor of any city has not enough power over prosecutors to, let's say, not allow such reforms, not allow, let people without a bail out of custody and all that. Shouldn't
Well,
there be more restrictions on the power of prosecutors?
well, there are laws. There are laws that prosecutors, for instance, have to prosecute crimes. What is happening by electing prosecutors who take the oath to prosecute all laws equally, decide not to prosecute. They're violating their oath. They're violating laws. And hardly anyone is taking them to task. As I say, the governors could do it. The people could do it eventually. But for instance, the state's attorney in Chicago decided not to prosecute certain crimes because most of the criminals in certain areas were black. She is black, so she decided not to prosecute them because too many blacks are in jail. That's totally, completely unconstitutional. It's racist. And yet, when crimes rose dramatically in Chicago, she was re-elected as the prosecutor because of the one-party Democratic machine continues electing corrupt and incompetent people. As a result, we have this a good legal system, but we have people that are not following the law. If the governors and the state's attorneys followed the law, we would not have the problem.
Our episode is not about the abortion, but as you talk, I remember one, well, example of that. I guess in Florida, a prosecutor said publicly that he will not prosecute cases that related to the abortion laws that are now becoming more conservative and not allowing abortion in any case on demand. And the governor, DeSantis, if I'm correct, said that he will force him to prosecute that. I don't know the details of all that, but there were also other states where prosecutors said the same thing, that they will not prosecute the abortion cases. And the governors, well, they went with that. They said nothing. They didn't stud against it. So it's the question of political will after all, right?
Yes, it depends who the governor is. Governor in Florida, DeSantis, had a prosecutor who refused to prosecute based on the laws. The laws did not outlaw abortion. They outlawed abortion after a certain period. Mm-hmm. And this prosecutor decided, state's attorney decided not to prosecute the laws. So he suspended him. Florida has a procedure where the governor can suspend the state's attorney, but the state's attorney has constitutional rights to get his job back. And that process is in progress right now. But in other states, when state's attorneys refuse to follow the law, like in Chicago, the governor does not do anything because they're the same party and same worldview. So they allow the prosecutors to ignore certain laws and enforce other laws. For instance, in Chicago, carjacking is considered a minor crime, and people that get involved, steal cars, don't go to jail. I mean, they're let out within an hour. They're back on the street stealing cars. Carjacking is when somebody is driving a car, stops at a light, 2 or 3 hoodlums come over, force their way into the car, throw the driver out, and take the car. And usually the car is used for other crimes or sold for parts. Chicago had over 1,000 carjackings, including downtown Chicago during the day, in the first 10 months of the year. So you can imagine, and the prosecutor does not prosecute those crimes. Or if they prosecute, the criminals are told not to do it again, to be nice and behave.
There is also a racial aspect to all this. You just mentioned it in Chicago. During the last decade, the accusation of police crime, of police racism, was louder and louder. In 2020, there was a kind of culmination of all that, the protest of Black Lives Matter movement. That was followed by looting, arsons, ruining of property, and other problems, to say the least. Is there any truth to the accusation of systemic racism in police? There are statistics that would support the claim that Black Lives Matter are raising.
Absolutely not. Historically, there was racism, and the racism has been basically abolished in the last 50 years. Racism is a great exception as opposed to not the rule. To give you an example, and this is something that the public, the major media will never bring out. Last calendar year, where the statistics are available, over 10,000 Black, mostly young men, were killed by guns in the United States. Over 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
Less than 10 were killed by policemen in unarmed arrests. And when they say unarmed, that could mean that the criminal had a gun but didn't pull the gun out, or had a knife but didn't swing the knife. Out of 10,000, only less than 10 were cases where policemen may have not acted properly. And yet, the police were painted as racist, discriminatory, etc. As a result, 250 cities were burned and many places were destroyed. Billions and billions of dollars worth of property was destroyed by Black Lives Matter and anti-fascist hoodlums, including federal buildings, state buildings, churches, schools, etc. Almost no prosecutions happened as a result. Even many policemen and innocent people were killed. You don't hear about those cases. If they are prosecuted, the media does not cover them. It's one-sided. I blame the media. I blame the politicians for not raising and explaining the issues. As a result, the police departments across all the Democrat-run states, which is about 25 states, received less money. They got more supervision, more criticism, more rules and laws against policing. As a result, they're demoralized and they could not replenish the ranks. And as a result, crimes have risen dramatically. The United States is in criminal law crisis.
You said that the media is not raising the questions and the problems to the public sphere. I would agree. I asked this about the racial question honestly, because in Lithuania, in our mainstream media, about the Black Lives Matters protests, we've heard only, well, positive news. You can find that dark side, you know, the crimes they commit, the damage to the public property and to private property only on the internet, on not so mainstream sources, let's say. And it raises a question. But then you read the very mainstream sources like Wall Street Journal, which I did 2 years ago, and I remember one article, I don't remember the author, that explained the statistics that most of the killings, homicides in United States are blacks killing blacks. And you can adjust that statistic to the proportions of races in the United States. You know how many there are black people in America, how many white people, and still, however you do that, you still get the percentage of blacks killing blacks is the biggest one, and there is no over proportion of policemen killing black suspects. There is none. It's very proportionate. So for me, it was an honest question, and it still is, because on the mainstream media, it's still not explained. Where is that systemic racism in America? And in social science, at least, there is this concept of falsificability. You know, can you show, can you prove empirically that something is or is not? Can you prove something wrong? And if you cannot, then the claim is not falsifiable, let's say, and it's not a scientific claim. And for me, it seems that the systemic racism, it's that kind of a thing. You cannot prove it wrong, you cannot prove it right, you just believe it or not.
Well, you're absolutely right as far as the crime statistics are concerned. For instance, in Chicago, over 95% of blacks that are killed, and mostly people that are killed are blacks in Chicago, in poor black neighborhoods. Over 95% are killed by blacks. Some are killed by Hispanics or maybe even whites, but the great, great, great majority are blacks on blacks. What's more characteristic is that most of the murders in Chicago, for instance, are not solved. People are afraid to testify because the criminals are back on the street. Gangs are out on the street. There are about 3 or 4 times more gang members than policemen in Chicago. And media does not cover that. In typical Chicago weekend, there are more killings than the dramatic killings that you hear when there's a mass killing and 20 people or 15 people or 10 people are killed. You hear them, you hear the news all around the world. In Chicago, last weekend, one day, they had 53 shootings and 10 killings. And it was not noted anywhere in the US media. It's not even news. Now, when they criticize the police, and the police are demoralized and they quit, the people that suffer the most are the poor and especially the blacks. The black neighborhoods right now are dangerous even during the daytime in Chicago. Who are the victims? Blacks and Hispanics. Who are the people that are passing the laws and electing the people to run the criminal system? Mostly ultra-liberals living in safe neighborhoods. It's very ironic, it's very unfair, and it's not covered in social media, it's not covered in major media. Perhaps the best example of how the media covered the riots, the Black Lives Matter and the Antifa riots, when they were burning the cities down. I believe it was, I don't want to mention which, I think it was NBC, but I'm not sure. A newscaster is standing in front of a block that's on fire. And he says, the police are cracking down on peaceful demonstrators. And that's how the news was always presented. A group of people would come out to protest, and people are allowed to protest. That's a constitutional right. In the evening, the anarchists came, and the thieves came, and the robbers came, and they burned the cities. And the media presented it as peaceful demonstrators. Billions of dollars were contributed to those organizations that are organizing the so-called peaceful demonstrators. Black Lives Matters received $100 or more million in donations. And then it turns out that the leaders are Marxists and they're buying $10 million or $5 million homes for themselves. And none of them are concerned about blacks being killed in blacks' neighborhood by blacks. When Chicago has murder rate of 1,000 people killed, mostly blacks, there are no Black Lives Matter demonstrators. Nobody cares.
We try to fit our episodes in about half an hour, so it's small period of time, short period of time for a wide and deep topic. I'm sorry for this, but after all that said, after all the aspects we touched, the racism or not, about the political, the media aspect, is there any way out of this situation? It sounds like a difficult, intermingled issue with no clear way out. Is there a clear way out, in your opinion, out of this crime crisis?
There is, but we need more than an hour to talk about it. But basically, in a democracy, and we still have a quasi-democracy in the United States, the people can, by using their vote, cause a revolution against the system that now exists. We need a revolution of voters. And I think that's possible. I'm an optimist.
Okay, Povilas, that was a high note for a first episode, saying that we need a revolution in the United States, but, lawful revolution by voting, right? So,
yes.
I don't think there is a way to sum up all that. I'll just leave the audience with their minds and thinking and questions raised in our first episode. I hope you found it useful. I definitely did. We started this believing that across the pond, meaning across the Atlantic, there is a lot of misunderstanding and lack of information about life in Europe for those in America and about life in America for those in Europe, as myself. And so we will try to, enlighten each other and all of you who will be listening, if there will be. So thank you, Povilas. It was very nice and useful conversation. I hope we can talk again, I guess, in 2 weeks or so.
Great, Vytautas.
Bye.